hear from me. So enjoy the meeting, and I hand over to Aditi again.
Thank you, Klaus. And again, please mute your microphones if you're not using it. Otherwise, it reverts back and the background becomes very noisy. I'm going to now introduce Jeff Good. I think we have 90 participants already. So it is an absolutely wonderful event for us. So Professor Jeff Good teaches at the University of Buffalo. His theoretical interests cover both synchrony and diachrony and the typology of linear relations within morphology and syntax. The focus of his research in this domain is the typology of templatic constructions, exploring how multivariate methods can help us better understand such constructions. Professor Good has been working on comparative and typological investigations of Benue Congo, in particular in Bantoid sub-branch in northwest Cameroon. He has also done significant work on Saramakan and Atlantic Creole. Jeff has also been very active in the development of digital techniques to facilitate language documentation, description, and archiving. He is especially interested in contributing to work on the modeling of different types of linguistic subjects, such as word lists and grammars. Professor Good completed his PhD from the University of California, Berkeley, which is of course famous for its work on these languages. And having done his BA and ME from the University of Chicago, before joining the University of Buffalo, he taught at the University of Pittsburgh, and he also spent 2 years at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology, I think both as a postdoc as well as a senior research fellow. Lutz Martin tells us the editor of the Transactions of the Philological Society, which this is our journal basically, that a new edited book has just come out on African multilingualisms, rural linguistics, and cultural diversity. And like many other scholars, Jeff is involved in the COVID-19 in terms of involved in online project on translating information into the community languages. It's wonderful to have you over, Jeff. And now let's see, we did practice this. Let's see if this works now. So shall I try to make you the host? Or do you want to just share the screen? Shall I make you the host first? We'll try to share the screen.
Let's try to share the screen. I think, let's see if I can. Okay, so I will start by sharing the handout.
Yes.
Does everyone see that?
Yes.
Perfect. Great. Well, thank you so much for that introduction. I guess I should start the talk. It's a little hard to do this without the normal kind of audience and visual cues. I'm grateful to everyone for attending today. When I first started preparing this talk, I didn't expect in particular to see so many expert Bantuists in the audience. Some of you may have seen an earlier version of this work presented at the Proto-Bantu conference in Ghent in 2018. And so this is going to be sort of an update of that, but also trying to focus on aspects of this topic that I think are of more general kind of philological relevance. I hope everyone has a copy of the handout. What I'll do is sort of go through it as I'm talking through it, kind of scroll through it here. For those of you new to Zoom, if you press escape, you should be able to get out of the full screen mode if you want to look at the handout on your own and not at the same pace that I am looking at it. And you might also want to go to a separate online map I made to help people navigate the data that we're going through here today. So let me actually just start by showing that map for a second, just to introduce what's going on. I think the relevance will become clearer. Oh, I should add as well, well, if anyone has trouble getting, I don't know if you can see this link, getting a copy of the handout, there's a copy on my website as well. So let me see if I can, I don't know if I can activate the chat or not, but maybe if someone wants to send a message, I think there's a link here. I don't seem to be able to activate the chat easily, or I would copy the link there. But the main link to this map is actually on the handout. And so What this map does is it goes through the languages I'll be talking about. If you hover over a dot and kind of click on it, first, if you hover over, you'll see the name of the language that was part of a survey I'll be discussing. The language name is followed by a so-called Guthrie code. These are these funny letter-number combinations used by Bantuists. They're part of Malcolm Guthrie's referential classification of Bantu. Normally, these tend to, I think, confuse non-Bantuists, but for the Bantuists in the audience, this might just help you understand how I chose to sample. I used Guthrie's referential classification to guide how many languages I chose to look at here. And had this talk been in SOAS, I mean, this talk was originally supposed to be at the School of Oriental and African Studies, and I feel that I should just mention that Malcolm Guthrie was there for many years. He was one of the leading Bantuists of the 20th century, and so he was a professor at SOAS, where we were supposed to have this talk instead of virtually. If you click on one of these dots, you'll get a brief summary of the major features of the language's final vowel system according to the descriptions that I was looking at. So that just gives you, especially I think when we go through many languages in a part of the world people aren't familiar with, it can be hard to keep track. I hope this may help some people keep track. And the classification of languages into these different color categories should be clearer as I continue with the talk itself. So I'm going to go back to the handout now. So let's see. All right, hopefully that's there. Please, Oddity or someone, just feel free to unmute yourself if there are ever any technical glitches so I can be informed. But hopefully everyone now is looking at a map of the Niger-Congo family. So this is just to kind of give everyone an overview of the genealogical context of the languages I'll be talking about today. I'm really focusing on I could be focusing on Bantu, sort of Bantu family down here. I think this should highlight for everyone, which is in the southern part of the Niger-Congo family. But you can see from this overall map a general sense of the sort of major branches and major breakdown and geographical spread of the family. One thing to warn those of you not familiar with comparative Niger-Congo about a map like this, if you look at this kind of map, you would think that Bantu was a major coordinate sub-branch or branch of Niger-Congo, but in fact, it's really more of a sub-branch. It is a very geographically and socio-politically successful offshoot of the rest of the Niger-Congo languages. But Bantu is in fact universally treated in genealogical classifications now as a subgroup of Bantoid. So the non-Bantu Bantoid languages are found in this area, and Bantu is seen as a subgroup of Bantoid, and Bantoid is in turn understood to be a subgroup of the Benue-Congo group, which is found primarily in Nigeria and nearby areas there. So so just to be aware of that particular distortion. And then within the Bantu homeland itself, for those not familiar, is believed to be roughly in this Bantoid area here, and then Bantu was a very successful spread to the south and the east some thousands of years ago. In this particular talk, I'm going to be looking specifically at the so-called Northwest Bantu languages, which I'll try to kind of highlight the core Northwest area here. Oops, lost it. Let's try again. The Northwest Bantu languages, kind of roughly in this area, maybe a little further north. I should get them up. Technical difficulties, sort of roughly in this region. The term Northwest Bantu should here be understood as essentially a geographical term, not a genealogical term. There's probably multiple distinct branches of Bantu there. The Northwest Bantu languages, they're the closest Bantu languages to what's believed to be the Bantu homeland. They tend to show overall greater grammatical diversity and then probably genealogical diversity, but the picture is still not as clear as we would like there. For those of you who are probably more familiar, or those of you who are not familiar with Northwest languages, it's the Bantu languages more to the kind of east and to the south that you see more in general linguistic work. These have a somewhat famous agglutinative structure that we see in, for instance, Swahili or Zulu, if you've seen data from such languages. The languages of the Northwest area do not have that same degree of agglutinative structure. They have some agglutinative morphology. From the perspective of Eastern languages, they look like their morphology has broken down somewhat, and they've been subject to patterns of loss. And I'll kind of come back to that issue later on in the talk about how we interpret the different morphological profiles of the Northwest languages against other Bantu languages. Okay. So then in this talk, oh, here's, by the way, so if you have a copy of the handout, the link to the online map is down here if you want to sort of click around in it. One thing maybe I hope people will do, instead of checking their email when they're tired of listening to me, they can go to the map of the languages being surveyed and click around. And so maybe that will be a way to avoid the inevitable digital distraction when we're all in front of our computers at an event like this. Okay, so in this particular talk, I'm going to focus on a specific slot of the Bantu verb. It's the so-called final vowel slot. I've given a schematic representation of the Bantu verb here. This follows Meusin's classic work on comparative Bantu, update a little bit based on a presentation that Gould gave of it. The area of special interest of this whole complex verbal structure is going to be the shaded area between 0 and 2. This is going to be the so-called verb stem. So I won't have really as much to say about the prefixes here, which also obviously add a significant amount of morphological complexity. I won't really say anything about the post-final slot here either. So it's going to be the slots 0, 1, and 2. And slot 2 is going to be the most important one here, the so-called final slot. And in particular, looking at a set of morphemes that appear on the slot called the final vowel. I will also have some things to say about certain verbal extensions, especially these valency markers that appear between the root and slot 2 in what here I'm labeling slot number 1. So just make sure. So this particular slot, the final slot, is associated in reconstructions with a small set of morphemes, and in particular, it's associated with a set of so-called final vowels. So I sort of mentioned these in bullet 5. So there are 3 final vowels that are reconstructed. It's a small set of forms, and you can even maybe tell from the name final vowel that the forms are a little bit odd morphologically. So they participate in the tense aspect, mood, and polarity marking system. So they are parts of a complicated system of exponents involving prefixes, final vowels, and tone in order to code tense aspect, mood, and polarity. Sometimes other kinds of affixal marking, like in the post-final slot, slot 3 is recruited as well for this. But the fact that they're called final vowels already indicates their sort of suspect nature, that they are characterized in terms of a phonological category rather than more of a functional category. So there, 3 of them have been reconstructed more or less for Proto-Bantu. There is an ah, which seems to have something like a default function. That itself is also problematic, that one of these markers, you can't really give it a functional category beyond default. There's also an a that maybe is associated with a subjunctive or more irrealis function. And then it's a little more complicated, the reconstruction of the past form, maybe e, and that seems to be something associated with past or interior. That's the one that probably has the most coherent function of the ones that are reconstructed. If you take a look at bullet 7, I've tried to give an example of how these vowels function in what you might think of as a canonical Bantu language, the kind of Bantu language that most non-specialists are familiar with. This is an example from Chichewa. We have a sentence here: the baboons want the lions to steal some beads. There are 2 verbs here and 2 final vowels. Both of them are bolded. The first one is the a. It has a high tone here in the verb for want, akufuna. This is the sort of default a. It's appearing in this present tense construction, kind of finishing out the verb and part of this multiple exponents pattern, or kind of complex exponents pattern of present tense marking. It's just glossed here as FV for final vowel because, as I mentioned, it's hard to give a more specific gloss than that. The second verb that's is in this kind of subjunctive or irrealis or wishing context is steal. So we've got idzabe, and you can see the verb steal here. It's a short verb, just consists of a consonant, but it's followed by the high tone E final vowel that's kind of associated with these irrealis contexts. And this is very close essentially to the reconstructed pattern. What we have are verbs have a final vowel slot. The final vowel has to appear in all verb forms. It can be a or a or maybe another vowel depending on the particulars of the morphosemantic context. Coming back up to the overall verb structure for a second, I should say that really when we look at these slots, Most of these slots are optional in the sense that they don't appear in all verbs, all verb forms. Even the one slot that looks like it's obligatory in the prefix cluster, the subject slot, is not obligatory in certain imperative contexts. So the slots that are really most obligatory, the two slots that you always see in a canonical Bantu language, and that's reconstructed for Proto-Bantu for every verb, even a very plain imperative verb, will be the root and the final vowel. So they're kind of integral to surfacing verb structure. So what I want to do in this talk, it's sort of part of this study I've been doing trying to get a better sense of the reconstruction of final vowel patterns, in particular by paying closer attention to the relatively neglected data from the Northwest Bantu languages in comparison to more Eastern and Southern languages. What I want to be able to do is, first, I want to highlight at least to show why I think this problem of reconstruction is of relevance to a general linguistic audience. There's sort of unusual hybrid morphological and phonological role. And I'm sort of interested in how this can develop, so I'll make it clearer how that plays out sort of in the next few minutes of the talk. The core part of the data from the talk is in 8b. It's going to present the results of a survey of Northwest Bantu languages for verb final morphological patterns, and I'll make clearer why I wanted to do that survey as well. And then I'll sketch an analysis at the end of the talk of the historical development of the morphological hybridity of the Bantu final vowels, and I'll explain more what I mean by that in a second. But the key aspect is already somewhat visible. It's the fact that these final vowels do not only play a role in morphological marking, but they also play a critical phonological role in allowing verb roots to surface, because they cannot surface as just CVC structures or C structures. They need to have this final vowel to appear in part for prosodic reasons. For those of you less familiar with the overall genealogical context here of the Bantu languages, and of sort of Niger, Congo, and generally, so I want to say there's not a lot of work on the reconstruction of the final category for Niger, Congo verbs in the wider family. In Nurse's 2016 study, Nurse et al., I should say, they do suggest that this final category that we see, going back up, that this final slot could be reconstructed for Niger, Congo, but they don't reconstruct the interesting morphological hybridity that we find in Bantu. So even if some of this is an inheritance from Niger, Congo, Bantu has clearly innovated it in some interesting ways. And the next sort of piece to have here, as I've hinted at, but I'll just say again, is that these Northwest Bantu languages, because of the way their morphology differs from more canonical Bantu in the Bantu languages in the east and south of the Bantu area, they've complicated the comparative picture. And so I think it's not just myself, there are other Bantuists that are starting to look more closely at the Northwest Bantu languages now, especially since some more data is available, to try to see what they say about a comparative picture that's been primarily informed by Bantu languages in the east and sort of southern Bantu area. Finally, in general, Bantu kind of replicates a broader morphological problem in Niger, Congo, where languages of the family actually have starkly diverging morphological profiles. There are some Benue Congo languages, for instance, that are largely isolating, and then you have the highly agglutinating Bantu languages. There are also languages in the north of the Niger Congo area, like in the Atlantic area, like Fulani, that have Bantu-like agglutinating structures as well. So you have isolating languages all the way through agglutinating languages within the family, and the sort of Northwest broader Bantu picture is just one piece of this kind of interesting morphological diversity in Niger, Congo that is of interest to me in this talk today. So in section 2 now, I want to say more about the role of the final vowel in the Bantu stem. And I want to do that in order just to make clear how it plays this dual morphological or sort of semantic encoding and prosodic role. So again, just to kind of give you a sense, focusing on this core part, the stem cluster of the Bantu verb structure and where the final vowel fits in here. So coming back down. The Bantu verb stem is not merely a morphological unit, and one thing to also bear in mind is that while the sort of reconstructed schematic form of the Proto-Bantu verb makes it look as though it's a relatively flat structure, there is some articulation, and prosodic evidence in particular shows that there must be some additional structure to the Bantu verb beyond just the structure of the, beyond just the sort of flat set of slots or labeled slots in the structure. And the verb stem itself seems to be a fairly coherent prosodic unit as well, and maybe also kind of a morphosemantic unit, but I won't say as much about that here. One thing that is striking about it is it has a canonical phonological shape of this kind of CV-CV pattern. I illustrate and say something about this in bullet 12. It has to have this sort of sequence of open syllables. It should be generally, there are some exceptions, minimally 2 syllables, or maybe 2 moras, depending on the details of the particular language. So it should be, but sort of often has a CV-CV shape. We see this in the reconstructions. So it has, as I say in 12a, a root with a canonical C1V-C2 shape. And there are also, importantly, phonological constraints and patterns about what can appear in C1 and what can appear in C2. So it's not simply consonants and vowels. There are also constraints on what can appear in each of the consonantal slots. It is possible for the stem or the root to be extended with so-called verbal extensions, and they tend to have a shape VC. So what they do is allow the root to be expanded without breaking the CV-CV pattern, and then the final vowel, sorry, which is that V here, this is the final vowel here, allows to sort of complete this CV-CV shape. It's not merely about the consonants and vowel patterns. There are other kinds of prosodic constraints. I think, interestingly, there is work that shows that these sort of Bantu verb stem is subject to so-called minimality constraints, so it shouldn't be too short. Even when you have verbs that are maybe subminimal lexically, that is, their lexical specification is shorter than expected, various phonological repair processes are observed. But it's not only subject to minimality constraints in some languages, in different ways, it also seems to be subject to maximality constraints. So it shouldn't be too large, sorry, it shouldn't be too small, and it shouldn't be too large. It just has to be just right, right? So it's sort of morphologically and prosodically constrained in size. And then also, as I mentioned, there are segmental positional constraints, and those affect both consonants and vowels. The final vowel has an interesting role here because it clearly has a role in encoding T, A, M, P, tense aspect, mood, and polarity distinctions. That will be clearer when I talk about some of the Buck-Query data in 15. It's taken me a little while to get to data, but we'll start talking about that soon in bullet 15. But the final vowel also needs to be there to fill out the prosodic form of the verb. So it's obligatory in a sense that it's encoding tense, mood, aspect, and polarity, but it's also obligatory prosodically. If it weren't there, you'd have a prosodically defective form. And the vowel in many languages is probably the most interesting here because it's so hard to pinpoint specific semantics for it. It seems to have default semantics. So it's a system that looks to some extent like use this specific final vowel if needed for this semantics, or that specific final vowel for some other semantics. Otherwise, throw an ah on there, and that helps you partly encode the tense aspect and mood, but also fills out the prosodic form. So, and for myself, at parts of my broader research interest that Aditi mentioned at the beginning of the talk, I'm interested in templatic structures and also what I would call sort of non-canonical signifiers generally. That is, morphemes or maybe other kinds of structures that have kind of unusual properties with respect to their formal realization and how those formal realizations connects to their sort of functional, what they express functionally. And so this is, for me, a broader typological puzzle as well as a comparative Bantu puzzle. To make this discussion more concrete, this is the first example I want to give from one of the languages of the survey. This is Buck-Query. Let me go back to the online map for a second so you can kind of see where this is. It's actually a aerially unusual language. So it's spoken, as you can see, the northern languages in the survey tend to be yellow or orange. And basically that means that they show less canonical systems. That is, their final vowel systems don't match the structure you see in Chichewa or the reconstructed Bantu structure very closely. Buck-Query was sort of a regional outlier here, where it actually shows something quite close to the reconstructed system in the verb stem. Sort of read about that there, but that's sort of up in the Cameroon near these other kind of yellow and orange languages. I'll go back to the handout now. Where is the? To the handout now. So that's, this is an overall overview of the Buck-Query tense aspect mood polarity encoding system. You have a category label here. There's a list of glossing abbreviations at the end of the handout for those who want to get more details on how to decipher categories like this. There's a nice schematic representation in terms of tone and affixes. So for instance, if you want to say, I will wash in Bakweri, you have in the future, there's no special tone on the subject prefix. That's what SP is. There is no special tense aspect mood polarity prefix in the prefixal position. And then you'd otherwise get a low tone final vowel ah. And then you can kind of see the other pieces of the system. The final vowels vary between ah, a, and e. And then you have different tonal patterns on the subject prefix, as well as different possible prefixes and tonal patterns in a prefixal slot. This is not a particularly, there are some differences than other, say, Eastern Bantu languages, but this looks more or less close to the kind of canonical pattern. And you can see that these final vowels all have to appear. They all fill out the verb stem while also playing a sort of secondary role in encoding tense aspect, mood, and polarity. And you can kind of get a sense of the default structure of ah as well. Future, negative, past, and a perfective construction are coded by ah. They're not obviously semantically coherent categories. I'll come back to an extra wrinkle in the Bakweri case in a few minutes. But now I want to go over what I sort of see in the Northwest with respect to its overall patterns, overall verbal patterns in this particular survey, and these are listed in 17. So there's variation in the number of morphological vowels found at the end of the verb, as well as morphemes in the final position that consist of more than a vowel. So I'll go over some languages that show those patterns. There are some complications in the categories that a final vowel encodes. This has been reported elsewhere in other studies of Bantu, in particular Gregoire's earlier study, but also have some new examples where the final vowel's appearance is not just sensitive to tense aspect, mood, and polarity, but also prosodic features of a stem. Also some interesting interactions. This is in C and D between final vowels and stem final vowels and stem final morphology or phonology in general. And I think some of the data I'll show in C and D give us clues as to how these final vowels developed their hybrid morphological and prosodic structure. So towards the end, we'll get to these kind of phonological interactions of the final vowels. Just to preview some of the conclusions that I'll make, and then I'll come back to these at the end of the talk. One thing that I think comes through in part from the survey is that the right edge of the Bantu verb is a more active site for the formation of new morphology than sort of implied in a lot of the general considerations of Bantu verb morphology. Going back to the schematic representation of the Bantu verb, there's been a lot of discussion about how this slot would have -2, the post-initial slot, really is a cradle for lots of new morphology. There's no question. There's lots of pathways for grammaticalization of new prefixes here, often from auxiliary structures. But there seems to be maybe more, at least in the Northwest, going on at the right edge than a lot of previous things indicate. I don't know that anyone has said there couldn't be morphology there, but I don't think it's as well recognized as it should be. Another point, this is an 18b. I'm going to claim this might be the more controversial aspect, that the canonical Bantu final vowel system is probably best historically modeled as a prosodically driven collapse of what was a more diverse and morphologically typical system without hybrid qualities. That an interplay of prosodic and morphological change collapsed a previous broader set of morphological distinctions into that very compact paradigm that is reconstructed for Proto-Bantu and that we see in many Bantu languages today. And then this is sort of the point that I have in C as well, that these prosodic constraints are sort of the special feature of Bantu that allowed for this interesting pattern to develop. So in section 3, I'm going to now get to the core part of the data survey that informs this talk, the survey of Northwest languages. I won't give all the languages as much detail. I'll sort of give the highlights of the survey here and talk about the overall patterns found within these sort of final vowels or verb final morphology in different Northwest languages. The first one is to come back to Bakweri, which we just saw up here. So we see that up here. It turns out there was an extra wrinkle of complication there, which is of interest to show you some degree of innovation in the final vowel system. While it mostly follows the Proto-Bantu pattern, the language has innovated a fourth final vowel. This is with this F vowel, and it appears in an interesting set of contexts. You might call them certain extraction contexts. In past negative forms and relative clauses and content questions, this rising tone has emerged as a fourth final vowel. It looks like it might be a fusion of some other morpheme that came after the verb and probably fused together, creating a rising tone and this interesting other vowel quality. But this just says that this can be a site of new morphology formation, even though I don't have any particular insight on what triggered this special block query pattern. A language that will come up several times, because in some respects it was one of the most interesting ones in the survey, is Kako. I'll show you where it is on the map, because I'll be mentioning it a few times. So it's over here listed by Glottolog in the Central African Republic, sort of over off in this area. And this shows a lot of interesting final patterns, both involving final vowels and one other non-vocalic morpheme, a CV morpheme. This is my initial illustration of the Kako system. There's actually some complexities in it that I will get to as we sort of progress through the talk. Verb forms have an infinitive that ends in what looks like a more or less lexically specified final vowel, but there are prosodic constraints on it that I'll mention later on. And then this can be replaced with vowels with either form a, include also nothing. So this deviates from the Proto-Bantu pattern where you are allowed to have consonant final stems in this language, or also a past tense form ma that has a complex morphological realization as well. This was the most complex final system found in the survey, where you have, depending on how you count, sort of 4 or 5, like 4 to 5 different possible verb endings. The ma suffix is possibly connected to a Proto-Bantu verb that means finish, although I think its position is unusual, but a verb that means finish does become a prefix TMA marker in some nearby languages. So that might be tell us something about the source for the Kako verb ma. So this is the largest system. I want to actually move now to a logically minimal system. So this is a nice thing about these Northwest languages. They sort of attest systems that are larger than the reconstructed pattern, as well as systems that are a lot smaller than the reconstructed pattern. So this is Ngunu. Ngunu still seems to have a morphologically active final vowel. I'll say what I mean by that in a second. However, it really codes nothing other than something as a verb. So with the exception of some exceptional stems, they're not well described in the source. One of them is the stem leave, domba, which seems to have an a at the end. But generally, the appearance of the final vowel is completely predictable via vowel harmony rules. The source makes use of an underlying vowel with form a, and then has various rules to derive all of the other features. So a after a after e and a, or u, after ah. You can kind of see the patterns there as well. So the form of the vowel is completely predictable. However, when you add some extensions, these are some verbal suffixes. They can code things like applicative or iterative or diminutive action or causative. These appear between the root and the final vowel, and they separate the final vowel from the root. So we get forms like fola to foleda, bola to bolena, etc. And you can sort of see that these extensions are intervening between the root and the final vowel. If I go back up to the schematic structure here, these are extensions in this position. They're reconstructed for Proto-Bantu. So what seems to happen in a Ngunu is the final vowels can still be morphologically analyzed. All that they seem to code is that something is a verb. But beyond that, they don't play a role in TMA encoding because they're otherwise phonologically predictable. So that's one reduction. So that's the smallest logically possible morphologically active final vowel system. And then we do get, if we move over, I'll go back to the map for a second so you can kind of see where we are. We're all kind of in a cluster in Cameroon now. We just saw Ngunu, that was over here. I will also be mentioning now Aton just to the south, and then Gieli down here, and Iyasa is very similar, though I won't present data from here. So now we're kind of looking at a cluster of languages down this way that are in the orange. So let me go back now to the handout. Okay, so in Gieli, what we have is all verbs need to end in a vowel prosodically. And you can kind of see this here. There are CV verbs, and there are also verbs that are CV-CV. They all have to end in a vowel, but the source there, Grimm's Grammar of Gieli, makes kind of quite clear and makes good arguments that this vowel should not be treated as a morphological final vowel, but it's just part of the lexical specification of these verbs. So somehow, and I find this to be actually a historically mysterious question. I don't have a good answer for that in this talk. in a language like this, verbs appear with these fixed final vowels, but I don't know what determines necessarily their form or their source. So the fact that they have a vowel is presumably due to prosodic reasons, but that doesn't tell us why the final vowel happens to have the exact form it does, which I think is an interesting historical problem right now. These are the basic forms in Gyeli. If you look in 24, I've also given some extended forms. You can look at the source itself. In this language, extensions seem to be best analyzed as having either V shape or VCV shape. They don't have this Ngunu pattern where we could analyze them as VC followed by a final vowel. Instead, the extensions are longer and just seem to replace the last vowel that we find on the verb, on the basic verb root, verbs like this here. So Gyeli gets us to a point where we have vowels, but they don't show any evidence for being morphological final vowels. Aton, sort of to the north of Gyeli, we saw not far off from Ngunu, is similar to Gyeli, except it seems to lack this restriction that all verb roots have to end in a vowel. So you can see some verb roots can just be CVC shape. I'm sorry, I accidentally got an extra verb root in there. All right. CVC shape. When the verbs, the CVCV verbs, like the ones at the bottom of this table, they can appear with a final vowel. It looks like only two vowels. There's prosodic restrictions there. Only underlying A and E can appear there, and the A may harmonize. And so in this case, the como word admire, the O could be analyzed as underlyingly A harmonizing to O, right? So we go through this whole system of the languages that we see here. We have relatively rich final vowel systems all the way to no final vowel systems as well. Maka, I should mention, I just briefly cited in bulletin 26 as an interesting case where the language seems to have completely lacked final vowels, except in a few instances where a root final high tone needs to have a phonological host, in which case a vowel can appear to host it in what would have historically been final vowel position. Okay, so moving on now to section 3.2, this is a question of what final vowels can encode. In this particular case, there's some patterns that we see in Kako as well as Tunen. So let me go back to the map for a second. So we've got Kako here, and then Tunen, which is, sorry, over here. So Kako and Tunen, we're going to be looking at these two languages. These are languages where final vowel appearance is partly sensitive to prosodic constraints. So in the Kako pattern, what we saw this language above here. This was the sort of a nice looking paradigm from Kako, but there are some complications there. Verbs end in a lexical final vowel, not fully predictable, but there's a strange set or kind of complex set of restrictions about what vowels can appear lexically in final position. And I've summarized these in the table in bullet 29. So we can have 4 different vowels, and the language seems to have a 7-vowel system, but only 4 vowel qualities are found at the end of verbs. And it's sensitive to the length of the verb root, or verb stem, because it could have an extension suffix. So it's sensitive to the length of the verb stem, whether it's 2 or 3 syllables, as well as the final consonant of the verb stem. So for instance, 2-syllable lexical roots, these would be CV structures that end in sonorants. Sonorants can end in final vowel e, a, or a, but if they're 3 syllables, that reduces to either e or a, right? Palatal verbs cannot end in the a final vowel. Verbs that end in labial velars have to always end in the e vowel lexically. These can be replaced with morphology, but this is the lexical final vowel. And verbs ending in this more complex pattern, if they're 2 syllables, can take 3 of the vowels, and if they're 3, they take this sort of other shifted set. So e, a, and a, or e, and it looks like in general the A can be associated overall with longer roots, but that's not perfect. The A is overall associated with shorter roots. So there's this complex interplay where the final vowel is simultaneously encoding prosodic features of the stem, but it's also encoding the sort of infinitive feature of the stem, or the fact that the stem is not coded for a particular TMA category. So we see this as well. Things like this are also described for TNA, a language not part of the survey as well, the sort of interesting interplay of the final vowel realization of prosodic properties. It underscores in the ways in which the final vowel can really become simultaneously encoding tense aspect, mood, and polarity categories, but also be integrated and sort of be part of the prosodic system of the verb stem. Tunen is not quite as complicated, but it has a pattern that it basically lacks final vowels, except there's a class. There doesn't seem to be a semantic conditioning here. It's kind of complicated, but there's a class of verbs. The source does not specifically say they have to be low-toned and monosyllabic, but all of the examples seem to have this property where all of the verbs that can appear with this final vowel in past or imperative contexts, so not all verbs do this, but all the verbs that can appear to be monosyllabic and low tone. So we have a case where the final vowel of Proto-Bantu seems to have probably been lost in this language, but it only appears in some cases where particular prosodic conditions are met. Again, showing how this final vowel can be integrated into the prosodic system of a language while also doing some morphological work. Okay. In the next section of the talk, in section 3.3, I just want to sort of introduce or talk about another complication found that's kind of interest here. And this is found in a few of the languages. We actually are now get to move further to the south. So I'll be looking at Punu, which is similar to Miene, as well as now we jump back up to Bakweri. So let me go back to here. So let me get this right. So lost Punu. So Punu is down here. So we're looking at a language much to the south. So the languages all down in Gabon show something much closer to the canonical pattern, but with some potential complications. So Punu, Miene, I won't show data, but it's similar to Punu in some ways as well. And I'll come back at the end of the talk, say something about Mbede. So these are languages that all show a Punu-like pattern that I'll introduce now. Let me go back. So this is the case where the system is very similar to the Proto-Bantu system. So these are regular Punu forms based on the verb close in 36a. So we've got, if we look at the patterns like udubiga, utukitibiga, etc., we have various functions expressed by it. There are two final vowels, just a and e. The a appears in a bunch of forms. The e appears in another set of forms. The semantics are something that someone else could work on right now, but you can see the verb ends in an a or an e. It appears just where you'd expect. So it looks more or less what you'd expect from the Proto-Bantu reconstructions or by looking at an Eastern or Southern Bantu language. But there are these exceptional verbs. In this case, the first verbs you're seeing in B here in 36b are lexically exceptional CV verbs. There are these exceptional CV verbs reconstructed for Proto-Bantu. Most verb roots are reconstructed as CVC, but some CV verbs seem to be quite old. The two verbs here, eat and drink, are associated with Proto-Bantu reconstructions here, so they're good old Proto-Bantu verbs. In these particular verb roots are invariant for their final vowel. They otherwise take the same morphology as you would see for a verb like close in the prefixal space, and with respect to, say, subject prefix tones, but their final vowel is invariant. So there's kind of like a specified CV verb stem or verb root here, and there are no final vowel alternations. In Punu, this is not just restricted to CV roots as well. Here's a longer root. The passive suffix in Punu is just a vowel as well, of form u, and when this appears on a longer root like labu, this stem also becomes invariant. So there's sort of competition for this final vowel, or this final slot. If the verb root doesn't seem to have a final vowel lexically, you can have a morphological final vowel, but if it gets it lexically, like in the short verbs, or gets it via another suffix, like the passive that overrides it, the final vowel becomes morphologically invariant. Bakweri, which we saw above, spoken up in Cameroon, has something similar, where most verbs, this is the verb root wash we saw earlier, it's regular, the final vowels can alternate, but there are some verbs like the verb divide or the verb forget that end in invariant final vowels that don't otherwise change, right? So they don't change for tense, aspect, mood, and polarity marking. So this is another interesting pattern that can happen here. I think the historical interpretation of these is not obvious. I find at least for these short verbs like eat and drink, we could think of they're irregular historically, they're reconstructed irregularly, so we can sort of tell some story there. For a verb like forgive in Bakweri, I think it's sort of interesting to try to work out how that vowel became fixed and what quality it has. I have no good answer for that in this particular talk. But later on, I'll come back to examples like this and talk about how I think they fit into the reconstructed kind of historical pattern and how we can use them to model the development of Proto-Bantu. And then finally, in section 3.4, I just want to highlight some cases where there are nice patterns that happen morphologically to surfacing verb stem forms that make more complex morphological structures look more like Proto-Bantu on the surface. So I'll start and I'll say something about Bafia, and then also we'll come back to Kako down here. Let's go back to Bafia. I don't know how I am. So, okay, so we're gonna, in this particular section, we'll hear again from Kako over here, and then we'll hear from Bafia right near Ngunu up there. So let's come back and bring this up. Okay, so Bafia doesn't really seem to have a proper set of final vowels that are easily linkable to the Proto-Bantu system. There's maybe this, here's a summary of the system. I don't want to go through all the details of the system. I think that was, we don't need to go through every detail of this table. You can see it has a series of finals analyzed. Either there are verbs that can end in nothing, verbs that can end in E, which does look like a Proto-Bantu suffix there, verbs that end in Kha, which is probably connected to a different Proto-Bantu suffix, not a historical final vowel. And there's also a tone pattern called metatony, where a verb can end in a high tone unless it's not followed by an object or something else in the verb. So there's sort of a tonal alternation that you can see as well there. What I'm most interested in the Bafia case is what happens when these various suffixes actually surface on verb forms, and we can get complex verb stem final patterns. So some verbs already look kind of normal. So the verb gather here, we would just say it has the perfective suffix E as a final, akasi. It actually looks like a good Proto-Bantu verb, CV at the end. But in other cases, complicated morphological processes can occur at the boundary between the final and the end of the verb root. So for instance, in a verb like see, it should be underlyingly something like kheni or kheni, but it surfaces as he with a different vowel entirely. I don't know if this is, so this just shows you about a pattern of prosodic integration, about how this final becomes integrated into a verb stem in a particular way. The ha has an interesting pattern. So in this particular final, in this particular verb, for return, it has a verb be with what's called here this retrospective suffix. So that just looks like baha, and we can see it just surfaces as ha there. A more interesting case, I think, is the pattern of this verb teka in this example in 40D. He had taken the money. This underlying verb looks like it should be a te kha. So the verb take should be te with a glottal stop, and then we should have ha. But instead we have a merger of the h and the glottal stop into a k. And what's nice about this is we have a surfacing form that looks more canonically Proto-Bantu, CV, with a nice a at the end, than the underlying form does. And I think that while I wouldn't say this happened in Proto-Bantu, I think this might serve as a model for how the Proto-Bantu final vowel system developed, where a more complex suffix became reduced to simply a vowel, apparently integrated with the stem. The kako past tense suffix that we saw earlier does something similar as well. This seems to be a suffix. So we saw kako earlier. It has all sorts of interesting prosodic patterns going on. It looks like the past tense in kako should be underlyingly a high tone ma. We see it attached to CV verbs as a ma. We see it attached to this verb kella, kelma. There are some complications. Some verbs that end in a vowel, they actually keep their final vowel. So there's some complex realization where kitte is kittima, but the ma is still there. Woka, wokuma is still there as well. However, there's a class of verbs. So stems that end in a final vowel a keep the a, but again, we see the ma, sana, sana ma, right? This is all in bullet 41. We see this nice class of verbs that end in this kind of special class of I guess maybe palatal-ish consonants. It's hard to say, but this kind of interesting consonant class where the M gets lost in the past tense. And so these verbs all end. These verbs are ones that end in a fixed final vowel of e. So if I go back up, kako was the language that had these interesting prosodic distinctions, if we see in bullet 29. So verbs that end in a certain class of consonants tend to sort of be restricted to ending in an e, and these particular other these other verbs happen to also all end in e in the examples. So this is a case where these verbs have restricted final vowels and all end in, these particular examples all end in e, including this extended verb here that has a suffix on it. And in these particular forms, the E gets replaced with an A in the past. It looks like the Ma has gotten lost due to some sort of consonant interaction. So the Ma gets deleted in this context, and so suddenly we have something that looks very Proto-Bantu-like, except the vowel qualities are wrong, but we have one final vowel alternating with another final vowel to help encode past. So I think this is a kind of complication or an interaction that gives us some clue as to what may have been going on in the Proto-Bantu case. Irregular CV stems also show some interesting patterns as well, where we have a final vowel alternating with an A. So I think this might give us, again, some clues. These interactions may have happened at an early Bantu stage to produce the patterns that we see today. So I think I'm a little longer in time than I expected. So what I want to go to section 4 and really focus, I guess, on a reconstruction of what I think may have been happening there. I want to use, I'm not necessarily saying, I don't want to make claims about the timing of this reconstruction, but I think what we see in the Northwest are a set of processes that give us hints as to what may have been going on in the Proto-Bantu case. So I don't want to give these particular time steps within Proto-Bantu or the Northwest, but instead reconstruct pathways that could have produced the reconstructed Proto-Bantu system, whether the Northwest systems are conservative and the reconstructed system is innovative, or the Northwest systems have broken down and are giving us insights to cycles of change. I want to be agnostic on that here. But I've tried to summarize what I think could have happened based on the stages here that we see I have the summary in prose in bullet 48, and then schematically in bullet 49. So what I would propose first is that we might be dealing with a system that started with an aton-like pattern. So this was a language that could have CVC roots, but did not have to have roots that ended in vowels. Maybe there was some final like there were these post-root morphemes that were coding things, suffixes, but they weren't integrated in the way that we see now. Maybe they were just particles hanging out at the end. And then the next stage could have been Gyeli-like, and this is connected to the prosodification of the verb stem. That is, you go from languages that could have had a sort of lexical diversity in their verb roots to the imposition of a special prosodic pattern that we might see here, where suddenly all verb stems have to end in vowels. I've indicated these with lowercase consonant vowels, so CV, lowercase CV, to show that perhaps this second syllable was prosodically restricted, not as many contrasts as what you may have seen in the first one, as we created this prosodic stem. So this would be what we see in a language like Gyeli, for instance, that seems to require vowels at the end of every stem. And then then I have a complex set of stages, 3A, 3B, and 3C, where really I'm seeing these as one change, but with a sort of complex set of things happening at once. The development of new suffixes. So some post-verbal markers, I'm not going to speculate on their sources here, but if someone wants to ask during the question period, I could propose some ideas for what their actual source was. Post-verbal markers that were coding tense, aspect, mood, and polarity became integrated started to morphologize. Let me get my stages right here. Started to morphologize and become integrated into the verb stem as suffixes. So that's sort of stage 1 or stage 3A. When they became integrated, they would have become subject to the prosodic constraints associated with verb stems. So this is stage 3B. So we could have gone from a complex pattern like du mu ga, du mu a, du mu di, to a pattern where they start to phonologically interact with the verb stem to give you reductions like du ma, du me, and du mi. So this is the sort of key piece of morphologization plus prosodic integration. And then we wind up in this final stage with, on these longer stems, a small set of vocalic allomorphs. There could have been other morphemes here, say a ta morpheme or a da morpheme, or another morpheme with a, or another morpheme with d with different sources. But this process of prosodic integration would have reduced them to just a small set of vowels, which then crystallized into the sort of small, clear paradigm that we associate with the Proto-Bantu reconstructions. And then I would propose, perhaps, although I don't think this is as crucial for the overall study, a later analogical extension to help us understand what's going on in these languages like Punu, which have these irregular CV stems that don't have final vowels, where in the Proto-Bantu system, this CV-CV pattern would have been analogically extended onto all stems, including the short stems as well. So we would have gotten kwa, kwe, kui, where these stems may have actually been immune to these earlier processes of prosodification, maybe had the suffixes appearing in another way because they were shorter. There is actually a set of closely related languages in the B group of Bantu coming here that I didn't include in the formal survey, but the languages Mbere and Ndumu actually seem to attest, if you look at the source, I won't go into detail, this proposed stage 4. So I think there's some evidence for that. So then just to conclude and sort of tie this back to points of broader general interest, right? I think that if you want to know what makes the Bantu verb special, why was it able to develop this hybrid morpheme? I think 3B, I think this is the critical feature it had of these special prosodic properties that allowed it to develop this special morphological pattern. I sort of speculate here, although I'd be curious for input, about whether we might be able to use this Bantu pattern, which is somewhat more historically visible, to help us understand how really unusual patterns like Semitic morphology may have developed if we assume that sort of there was a complicated interlay of prosodic features overlaying more canonical morphology that became reanalyzed over time into this complicated vowel alternations, because the Bantu final vowels do look kind of like a baby Semitic feature where we have a sort of arbitrary final vowel alternating within a prosodic, within a particular morphological domain. So maybe this would give us clues into those much more ornate vowel alternation patterns. And I also think the Bantu verb stem provides us generally with a really kind of interesting case on how we, when we want to understand the development of morphology, we can't always, we have to sort of understand how the development of morphologically coded distinctions can go hand in hand with phonological constraints, and that we need to sort of, a really nice case where the grammaticalization pathway that we understand about how reduction or phonological shifts of grammaticalization interplay with morphological distinctions to create sort of morphological structures that are somewhat synchronically opaque because the phonology and morphology interacted in these complicated ways. Okay, I feel like I should stop there. I'm probably over time or maybe barely within time, but thank you everyone for sticking around this long.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Do you think you could stop sharing the screen so I can?
Yes, let me do that. Thank you for letting me know I was still sharing it, because I would have forgotten looking at my handout there.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed. I'm not going to ask everybody to clap because that's going to become very loud, I think. Yes, exactly. Thank you, Brittany. There's the clap sign over there. Terrific. Thank you very much indeed. Now we can have questions, and I'm going to look at the chat screen. And if I could please, either you can show your hand. If I can, there you go. Is that marked? Oh yes, is that a sign that you wanted to ask a question, or is it you? Oh, okay, no, you.
No, it was my applause.
Right. Okay, good. Thank you.
And I think people, if there's, right, for people not used to this, if you click on participants,
yeah, exactly.
Right, then you get that little raise hand under the participants button. I don't know if that helps people or not.
Yeah, you can get a raise, because it's just difficult to see over here. Where do we get a raised hand over there?
Yeah, you have to click participants. It's a little unusual for some reason.
I have that, but I can't see the raised hand.
Oh, because you're host. The host is not allowed to raise her hand.
I can't raise my hand.
I've had that problem myself, yeah.
Raise a hand, and maybe both Jeff and I can see it. Can you see under the participants a raise hand symbol?
Yeah, it's a long list, so I may not catch them. But okay.
But if nobody offers, then I'm simply going to point at people. Oh, Brittany, yes, you had a question. Can you unmute yourself, please?
Yeah. Hi, and thank you for giving such a clear introduction, putting everything in context at the beginning, since I have no background at all in Bantu languages. That was very helpful, thank you. I wanted to ask about the language Maka you mentioned.
Oh yeah, sure. Mm-hmm.
That it looks like from the map that you sent us that it's the only one that lacks these final vowels, like a regular.
Yeah, I don't want to say it's the only one that lacks them at all. It was just the only one right in the survey. And the survey was a little artificial where I used these Guthrie numbers. I just said, I'm going to take one from A10, one from A20, one from A30, one from A40, which might make sense. It doesn't actually make general sense, but it's kind of a default Bantuist procedure. But yeah, it is the only one in the survey that completely lacks them, although Bafia comes pretty close as well.
Okay.
Yeah, so does Tunen.
Okay. Well, I was just wondering, since you in your handout you mentioned that a vowel might appear if there's a high tone that's otherwise lacking a host. You said, is it always the same vowel?
Yeah,
or
I don't know how to pronounce it. It's written as a barred U. And let me see if I can still share the screen. I'm going to do something. This might be an advantage of Zoom talk, if this helps. Do you see this PDF now? Okay, so I don't know if it's going to highlight as well, but it's written as a barred U here. Do you see this example 7 from the source?
Yeah.
We'd have to double check in the pronunciation, but that's the quality that appears. So in this verb form, you see there's this H2, it's transcribed there because the following object begins with a consonant. So if the following object here is dog, it has a nice O, and the high tone will kind of move to the O in this case. And so we don't get the final vowel here. Do you see my pointer? I'm not sure. In 6.
Yeah.
And then here's an example down here. Where you get the barred U because the consonant doesn't permit the, there's no host for the vowel. So, okay, if we're gonna have to do this remotely, we might as well take advantage, right?
Yeah, so yeah, that was basically, I was just wondering if it was always just sort of the regular filler kind of sound.
Yeah, that's not necessarily a regular filler. The barred U seems sort of unusual, but I don't have a good, I'd have to double check the phonology of the language to make sure, to see what the role is of that particular vowel. I don't know, what it, I just, I feel like I must have checked at some point, but if I did, I've forgotten whether it's like English schwa phonologically or there's something else going on there.
Oh, okay. The other thing, sorry that I'm taking so long, but the other thing I was wondering about this was whether Maka or the other languages that you just mentioned that are similar in this respect, whether they are among the languages that have this post-final segment that's optional.
It should not, but I don't want to say for sure. I'd have to check. The post finals usually, other people I'm sure on this thing know more about the post finals than I do. They'd usually be like a CV shape or maybe possibly even a little longer. They're not, and they're sort of off to the side, usually less integrated. But it shouldn't have it. But I'd have to double check. I don't know.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, yeah. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brittany. Any further questions? I can't see everybody, but I'm trying to notice the hands if there are hands coming up. Jeff, you keep an eye as well.
Yeah, I don't see any right now. No, people are being shy or tired. Oh, got one from PP Robert.
Peter has it. Peter Austin, did you have a question?
No, it's PP Robert. I'm not sure who this.
Sorry, I didn't.
Just under Brittany.
It was me.
Oh, Philemon. Oh, hi, Philemon. Yes, please do.
Oh, hi.
Thank you for this talk. I too really appreciated how you explain things for non-specialists. I have a question, and this might be just something you might have said this and I didn't understand, but when you get these prosodic constraints developing, do you have thoughts about why that happens? Is there a reason why languages start to think I'm going to have some prosodic constraints here?
It's a great question, and I think I would almost want to, but I'll resist the urge right now. I don't know if Larry Hyman's still here. He may have better thoughts. I think one thing I don't think I mentioned orally, I may have hinted on the handout, at least when we look at the Bantu verb, I want to add, there's this extra puzzle where you get tonal melodies that are also encoding these. And it's hard to sometimes analyze them as one tone appears here or one there. Sometimes they're analyzed as more melodic. So the sort of prosodification also seems to be grabbing tonal features. I don't know, I don't want to go so far as to speculate that is, I would not say why. Could the fact that all the Niger Congo languages are tonal have permitted a kind of clustering of phonological traits that might have pushed it further? Some of the more unusual languages, I didn't talk about it in this talk, Larry Hyman, who was here, has written a lot about this Tiene, which does some really bizarre and fascinating things. You can read about this language. You almost wonder, it's also in an odd contact area for some of Bantu, and you wonder if that was part of it. But if I just say it's due to contact, I'm only kicking the historical question down as to why did this other family develop the prosodic constraints that may have been imported. It's even more when we go up just to the north. One reason why I do some field work on Bantuid languages, because they started to shrink their words and complexify their tones. And, you know, I think I could give you stories about maybe how did Bantu come out of Niger, Congo? How did this language start to shrink? Why did it start to shrink its syllables, right? But the sense I have is that the ingredients probably seem to already be there in many cases in Niger, Congo, if that's actually a reality. So that would be why I'd have a problem for the answer, right? So I might be able to say, well, if we reconstruct Niger, Congo, we already see pieces of this, right? They have tone, they have restrictions on the verb roots, they already have relatively simple syllable structure, and that maybe these put it together. But then to tell you, well, how did we get those pieces that led to the Bantu situation, I would just be kicking it down. Does that help? And so I think I could probably—
Thank you. Yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, tell a Niger-Congo story, but I don't think I could tell you, like, what were the magical ingredients there that led to the rest of this, if that makes sense.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Philemon. Any further questions?
The hands seem to be clustering near the top, which is nice, at least on my view, Aditi. So, like,
Sorry, what is it?
the hands are from my view, near the top of the participants list. So I see Scott
Really?
Grimm, Dimi, and Yenica.
Oh, yes, I have seen, well, there's one from Franz Planck. Okay, can you—
Oh, he's a physical hand. Wonderful.
Can you, all right, Franz, you next, and then I'll go to Yenica and Dimi. Yes, first Franz.
I was just wondering, Jeff, do you have a story for the asymmetry? I mean, there is, when you said at some point you're focusing on the right edge, and I mean, clearly there are things going on at the right edge. So probably, I don't know, new suffixes are being created, and then, well, they are demorphologized or whatever. But what's going on at the left edge? I mean, that's where the Bantu verbs are supposed to have.
Yeah, sure.
Prefixes. Is there anything going on there, or?
Yeah, and I will say, you said the word asymmetry, and so another idea came to my mind for the last question. So if you'll just give me a few seconds.
I'm asking, I think it relates to.
Yeah, well, there is this thing, so that I should mention, and there'd be people who could speak on this, maybe listening more than me. One of the features, and I don't know if I want to go as far as to say Niger, Congo, but you can say more comfortably Bantu, of the Bantu accentual system, is the first syllable realized as, say, prosodically strong. One of the reflexes of accent seems to be realization of greater range of contrasts in terms of consonants and vowels. You know, we think of English a little bit like this, where you reduce vowels to schwa in weak contexts, but this isn't quite extreme, but there's this, you get these sites of higher level phonological contrast. And I do think that if you're going to use phonological contrast range as one of your cues to something like accent, instead of, say, a stress-based language, that might be an important overall prosodic feature of the system that could allow for the right kinds of reductions to create these other patterns. So it might be interesting to look at how accent is expressed, how sort of phonological asymmetries are expressed in these languages. In this case, again, so I'm sort of in this, I'm being tied in two ways. Do I want to tell you what seems to be the case for Proto-Niger Congo to the extent that that's a valid entity, or do I want to sort of talk about universal general questions? So my mind's going on in these two directions. If there is such a thing as Proto-Niger Congo as we understand it, a lot of the suffixal patterns do seem to be older and more reconstructible, whereas the prefixal patterns probably are somewhat newer. There are historical complications here because if there is a Niger Congo, it's very old, so there's been plenty of time for multiple cycles to activate. But at least when we look at the Bantu level, it seems safe to say that most of what's going on, not all of it, at the right edge is older. And then the newer edge, it's much easier to come up with transparent grammaticalization sources for the left edge. Tom Gould has written on this. Larry Hyman and Tom have this interesting back and forth about the timing of it. But say the subject morphology looks a lot like it could be subject prefixes. The prefixal TMA often has sources in auxiliary structures. So if you have an S-aux auxiliary, verbal auxiliary structure, you can start to see the pieces there. Another question might be, and again, there are probably proper phonologists as opposed to more kind of amateur phonologists like me in the room who could talk about these stem initial positions. Like the root has this robust property of hosting contrasts, which blocks off probably some of the integration. So you could have a prefix, but if you're going to have a prosodically strong position in the verb root, it's going to be a little harder to create this integration than if you have a prosodically weak position at the end of the verb, which should give you fewer contrasts and allow for this more intensive integration. And this might tie into, there are universal suffix-prefix asymmetries like this as well. I think universally suffixes tend to integrate more than prefixes, and we could talk about that as a universal story and then look at the Niger, Congo / Bantu specific properties there as well. Does that answer your question at all? Yeah.
No, but
Shall we go to the next question?
Is still around? Is
Pardon?
Larry still around?
I don't, he had to go to office. Let's see. I don't know if he's still around.
I mean, I seem to remember work of his which claims that actually prefixes they really belong with the preceding constituent. I mean, they are being prosodically phrased with what comes before them. So in a sense,
yeah, there's one. Well, there is maybe in general we can talk about a prefix cluster in the verb. There is one particular language where the noun class prefixes do seem to prosodically phrase with the word before them. I'm blanking on the name. It should be in, I think, Congo. It's sort of roughly in the same area, but that might be what you're thinking of too. It's a fascinating pattern.
Right? Trying to say that the prefix was attaching to the preceding word rather than to the actual stem. But I'm going to go to the next few hands, please, because time is running out. So first, Scott Grimm.
Yeah, hi. So I'm Nadine Grimm, but we are using my husband's computer. Hi, Jeff. I really like your talk. I have a question that was clearly not part of your talk, but I was just wondering if you came across any patterns. So we know that at least for Southern and Eastern Bantu languages, the final vowel also often changes in nominalization. So I was wondering if you saw any patterns in terms of what a final vowel does in Northwestern Bantu languages when it comes to nominalization.
No, I'm just going to admit I didn't really, I mean, I must have seen some data like that, but I just put blinders on in order to be able to do this. Kun Bostun must have some work on this somewhere of these things. And of course, some of it would be, the only thing, I guess, I didn't talk about it. There was this one case of an interesting, but I don't know if it was an infinitive or not. One language had innovated an O final vowel in which one of the B languages, I had to sort of go back and look at my map, had innovated an interesting O final vowel, but it looks like it may, but it's hard to know if that was a nominalization structure or not. But there may have been some patterns. Definitely worth looking at. Is there anything interesting in Gieli that you think makes this relevant, or?
Well, I could not figure out the pattern. So sometimes they would just, well, mostly they would just stick with the vowel that was there, but sometimes there was a change and I couldn't predict it.
I will say, you know, nominalizations, if there were random nominalization vowels hanging around, and I feel like I just read something about this, but it's moving my memory now. We do have this puzzle. I don't know if you have any feelings about it for Gieli. In these languages that require vowels, but they're not final vowels, how do you predict the quality of the vowel that happens to appear on each verb? I don't have any thing to say about that. Maybe in some cases, I don't know if a nominalization vowel could be there, but I don't have any pattern. That's just speculation of like, what vowels do we have that could do that? Could also just be a noun class prefix that accidentally got lost on the verb. I don't really know. But it is a good question. I don't have anything intelligent to say about it, unfortunately.
Shall we go to the next question? Dimi? Whoever that is, must be a short form.
Good. Okay. Okay.
Oh, yeah. Hi.
Yes, it's me. It's me. Okay. A couple of questions. I mean, one is about the hybridity and what makes Bantu so special. I mean, I don't really understand what you mean by hybrid. So I have the impression that you try to express that. So this vowel is sometimes, we have a vowel, so sometimes it's analyzable as a morpheme, sometimes it's not analyzable as a morpheme, sometimes it's somewhere in between. And it does resemble to me something like the linking elements in nominal compounds in Germanic. So that you can say that you have allomorphs of the root, or you can say that they're morphemes. So these N, S, etc. And just related to this, so the question about what makes Bantu so special, I just wonder, I mean, is it because just Bantu is archaic? It's preserved many of these things while most other languages lost them. So it's like asking why German and Dutch preserved the linking elements, whereas English didn't.
Yeah, so I mean something, and I don't know, and I'm wondering if anyone else, especially, who a specialist of other families, can point to nice other examples. What I mean by hybridity, and maybe that's the wrong word, but is that if you were just to look at forget TMA marking, forget semantic function, all of that, the final vowel seems to need to be there for prosodic reasons. That if we only were to look at, say, the prosodic grammar of Bantu, we would need to have a vowel in that position. We don't know what it has to be. And if you don't have it, all sorts of things will go wrong, like, say, reduplication structures won't have the material they need. And and it's partly, of course, the syllable structure might force it there because you don't want to have codas, but there seems to be more going on because that CV-CV structure pops up in other morphological constructions. And I think, work on reduplication will show this, at least in Southern and Eastern Bantu, where if you try to reduplicate a short root, a CV root, you have to do something to put it into the CV-CV pattern. So if we were to just look at what I'll call the prosodic grammar of Bantu, we seem to need a vowel there. But then if we were to look at the sort of morphosyntactic grammar or the tense mood aspect expression of Bantu, we'd also need the final vowel there because they're part of this prefix, suffix, tonal melody complex, which is itself an interesting morphological pattern, a separate interesting pattern there that encodes the tense mood aspect polarity, right? So we have this, that it fulfills a crucial function in the prosodic grammar and a crucial function in what you might call the morphological grammar. Does that make, and you could contest and say my analysis is wrong or that's not an interesting distinction, and I'd be happy to have that argument, but does that make sense at least? Does that kind of answer your question about what I mean by the hybrid?
I think I understand it, but it resembles to me these kind of intermediate elements in morphology, so which are not really morphemes, not always morphemes, and sometimes you can analyze them as morphemes.
Yeah. Sure, I'm completely
like
with
this
you.
linking elements. So
there's
been a lot of discussion about that.
Yeah. So the question I would have is, and there, you get elements like this too. How often? I would love to see a typology of these strange linking elements. I just find these kind of things fascinating. And the question is, are some of them there for prosodic reasons, like the Bantu, what I'm claiming about the Bantu final vowel? Or maybe these linking elements are there for some other reason. So I don't know that someone has said that these linking elements appear for phonological reasons, but I'm not actually an expert. So that's kind of as opposed to...
Okay.
Yes.
There are a couple of articles about this. It must be a lot of articles on this on German.
Probably, yeah. Can we go to the next question?
Yes.
Oh, if I can answer this one little short thing. You asked, are they archaic or not? I think.
No, I thought that Bantu is archaic. That's why it preserved it. So that's why
I would actually
have them as morphemes.
Yeah, I would go a little further. So these are maybe reflecting an archaism, but Bantu's gone a step further by turning them into this small set of vowels and creating this very small paradigm. So Bantu's partly archaic with a little bit of innovation. Okay.
We have 3 more questions, and I think that would be about it.
Yeah.
Next is Jenneke van der Waal.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff, and thank you also to the Philological Society for organizing this online and allowing us all to participate. Jeff, you invited us in your wonderful table in 49 to speculate about the source of the suffixes in stage 3A. So I would like you to say a bit more about that, if you can.
Yeah, so it will be speculation, for some things. So, and I'm sure other people probably have, these are not supposed to be completely novel speculations, I'm saying. One set of things, in some Niger-Congo or bunches of Niger-Congo languages, you get these clause final particles that express different illocutionary things. You may have seen them, whether it's assertive or question or these sorts of things. Now, often these are analyzed, and you might see the same qua languages. You've probably seen them, other people will have seen them, and you're nodding, you kind of know the ones I'm talking about. Maybe they're like the Canadian A particle that we talk about in North America, like you in a sense, like it's a nice day today, A, and you add this extra small thing and somehow it's coding who knows what, right? And you see these. I don't know what the status of these would have been in earlier Bantu stages, but these are generally clause final. So if you have an object, it would be VO particle, but it's not hard to imagine contexts where they would be immediately verb final, right? And you could imagine those being one of the sources. I'm not saying the only one. But then we also have to look at, we'd have to start doing the study of what things can go directly after the verb. I think those are a good source for some of it, especially the kind of assertive, irrealis, the fact that it correlates with questions and all these sorts of things, some of these markers. How often there may have been directly final verbs, that doesn't quite go with the syntax very well. Like auxiliary verbs generally should be pre-verbal, so we wouldn't expect too many verbs to be there, but maybe a finished verb, of course. Some of the verbs that could be more often post-verbal in a serial structure could be there as well. And then we have to ask whether there might be some other random things. You know, the Bantu reciprocal suffix is believed to have come from a adposition that got incorporated into the verb. So there may have been a few other things like that. I wouldn't expect them to be all coherent. I would expect them to be a few of these things, high frequency things that occurred after the verb and then just kind of fell in. But I do think those clause final particles are a pretty good source for a lot of these functions. But telling that whole story is for another, obviously, day and set of complications. Does that help you with your question? If you have ideas, do you have ideas?
Just two brief things. It might give us some input for the OV versus VO discussion.
Yeah.
And that I'm thinking about the non-finality that you find in Aram and such languages. Well, connected then.
Oh yeah, I forgot about those. So I thought, what will I answer if someone asks me? And I thought I would mention those too, but you know how it is when you actually have to do it on stage. There are those things. So if you look at Agam or Noni or some of these Bantoid languages, they have these other mysterious particles that appear after a verb that mark things like focus-ish things. And I don't want to get too far into the weeds for people who don't know these languages, but those are there as well. And those are fun because they tend to appear optionally to code extra, you know, sort of assertion or focus something or other, focus flavors, or they're obligatory when the verb doesn't have any object or anything following it. So those are also good candidates. I think the only hesitation I have there is I don't think we know much about them. So we'd have to really tell that story more carefully. And where did those come from? You know, like I have absolutely, so it pushes the question off a bit. But those could be proximate sources that we see in some Bantoid languages like Agam or Noni languages. Up kind of, ironically, these are languages that I do my fieldwork on, but I forgot about them at the moment because I was in Bantu and not Bantoid zone. All right.
Okay, thank you very much. Shall we go to Ndongo Ibarra? To unmute yourself.
Thanks a lot. I have to congratulate Jeff and Philological Society. I would just want to give an example. Jeff was asked a question on nominalization and suffixes. There is an example from one language, which is Mboshi from Congo, Brazzaville. Sometimes it is Mbosi or Mboshi. But in this language, when we nominalize, that is a verb from a verb to a noun, the suffix is E for any kind of suffix. The prefix is O. And this is, we use this to nominalize a verb. If you take a simple verb like to give birth, that is Ibora, E is the prefix, Bor is the root, and A is the suffix. The parents, you replace E by O, and you replace the A by E, and you have Obori. This is for any verb you have in this language, this will happen in that structure. And I was very interested in what Jeff talked about hybrid. So this is why the last Bantu call, I was about to talk about if in Africa, present was a tense or an aspect based on the status of the suffix. Because I don't know if, because in the language, when we try to use paradigmatic, it should appear that the present will be more spectral than a tense. So I do thanks again, Jeff, for this conference and the Philological for this opportunity. It's my first time to take part of that. Thank you, thank you, and thank you a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can we go to Bastien Pezon?
Yes, so first of all, thank you for the interesting talk. I'm looking forward to reading the paper that comes out of this. I just have a short comment. We had a question on this in the beginning, what this language where the final vowel only appears when the high tone needs a tone-bearing unit. I think this is interesting from a more general perspective. I mean, I'm not a phonologist, but there is a bit of discussion going on that on the one hand side, you have the classic generative paradigm where you have all these segments and the prosodic structure and the hierarchical structure, and then you have to see where to put all those tones in the next step of derivation. And lately people have been arguing that the opposite thing happens too, that prosodic elements like tones can have an influence on segments being there or not being there. There's a preprint or maybe even the actual paper by Tom Morpheme on ResearchGate, where he gives examples, for example, from Southern Italian, where only in certain prosodic circumstances a schwa is inserted at the end of the utterance, I think. So those Bantu examples you gave, I think they could feed that debate quite well and add another African perspective to that.
That's great. I mean, sounds great. No, I was surprised by that. One reason why even though I didn't put it on the handout, I just sneaked in that little comment was because it seemed interesting to me. That seemed like it was worthy of more attention, that this vowel appearing to host a tone. So I just wanted to get that source known to a larger audience. The source should be, I think that whole book, I can't find the link now, is available, downloadable online. And the Heaths are still around for, I think, to help you more with Maka. What I can't say, so as you can imagine for a study of this kind, where and I think someone asked a question about this in the comments, how did I collect the data? I'm collecting this all from the existing descriptions and sources. I don't necessarily feel like that description had the knockdown argument you would need to prove that this is the only possible analysis and some other analysis, like maybe the vowel gets deleted, all the kind of the stories there. So I definitely agree that it's interesting. I hope more people look at it. The only issue is the source doesn't necessarily give all of the contrastive data that you would need to. Like, I basically decided to take the source's descriptive argument at face value, which otherwise I would kind of go a little crazy for this sort of study. But it's clearly, either way, it's an interesting pattern for the overall final vowel patterns, however you might go about it. And I think it also just illustrates, I should say, the way in which the overall prosody of these forms, including tone, gets co-opted or integrated into the expression of these final vowels, right? There's clearly a whole complicated set of behaviors going on in this unit, and tone is part of it too, even if I didn't have much to say about it here.
Oh, thank you very much. I think it's 5:30 and we are getting a lot rather tired. I mean, this sort of method allows so many people to join us, but it is rather tiring. So I'm going to take the privilege of the host by sort of making one comment and then thanking Jeff. Jeff, I noticed, I mean, you began by making a statement about the quality of the vowels that can encode, what vowels can be in word final position. And that point in 29 in some, it just looked like they were all non-high vowels. Now, it wasn't easy for me to follow all the languages, but it seemed like there was a definite distinction between non-high on the one hand and high on the one hand. Sometimes the high vowels would appear, but they were definitely more restrictive than the non-high vowels, and that is pretty unusual, I would have thought. But I'm not entirely sure that is this specific morphological categories which are doing this, or whether it's a general tendency for the lack of high vowels. I mean, Germanic has shown that, when you had high vowels as either stem extensions or as suffixes, they tend to be deleted for prosodic reasons alone, and that's the famous high vowel deletion. But low vowels were not. On the other hand, low vowels got reduced earlier. So there's always a distinction in many, many language and language families about this. I was wondering if you had any story about the Bantu languages.
Oh, so are there particular, I mean, I don't have a clear one. I should say, I'm trying to remember, there's this one nice language, didn't quite make the survey. You don't usually think about Bantu and umlaut. There is one of these languages, does anyone remember the name? Kuhn Bostun has written about it, just where high vowels got lost and then the vowels shifted to a very Germanic umlaut pattern. Anyone who's on there? No, I can look up the reference. It should be in the B zone. I had some longer notes, but there is some. Any case, just to bring this up, that it looks kind of like Germanic, and it's surprising because you're like, whoa, what's this doing in Bantu? Because that normally shouldn't happen. Were there particular high vowels or a particular language to point at to help me kind of?
E and U appear later in some of the languages, while they didn't come up earlier. It was just a question.
Yeah,
I mean, they might have just been the examples that you gave, but it was just a.
No, I mean, in general, I'm trying to remember. I'd have to check. So there are these obviously harmony patterns. You'd really want to do you'd have to check all you've got these patterns of harmony. As you probably know, a lot of the canonical or a lot of the Bantu harmony is unusual in that it has this, not exactly ATR, but this EA shift. There's a lot of things that are happening to the vowels late. And you can definitely get these E's and U's, but very often there are fewer distinctions. All of the distinctions should be realized in that first syllable. And then there are reductions, but I'm just going to have to say ignorance. I don't have a good sense of all the reductions. And then, of course, there are the 7 vowel systems and the 5 vowel systems. And you'd probably want to look at those separately as well to see how those things pattern out. The final vowel is a little probably less restricted in general, say in terms of tone and other things than the extension vowels. So those extra VC vowels are probably more reduced. The final one might be a little less prosodically restricted. But this would really be a question where I would just have to defer to Larry Hyman and let him, if someone knows the answer. There are things I know, but when it comes to vowel patterns in Bantu, I'm going to have to claim a degree of ignorance. But it is a good question. And mapping this out, and I didn't mention, a lot of these languages are affected by harmony processes, as you've seen, right, where the final vowel gets collapsed. And so that's obviously part of the story, but how high and non-high fits in is something.
And they play a role for the tone as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Really big excitement for us, and you did marvelously. And thank you so much. And I'm so glad nothing crashed and nobody intervened.
I know, me too. That's why I came to the university. I thought the internet would be better here. Yeah, we didn't get any Zoom bombers, which is nice.
It was a real pleasure. Thank you so much, Jeff. And
thank you everyone for coming from all over the world. I'm glad you stuck around this long.
Thank you.
Thank you.